Welcome to your weekly program, BelAhdan, the show that brings drones to your living room. Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, the anti-war during Bush, voted against war in Iraq when he was a senator, came up with the platform of chains, waging 2 wars now, and he's actually pulling troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, but instead he's sending his drones. And he's coming up with something called the killing list. The killing list, when he decides, he's sending a fatwa, who should die and who should live in those parts of the war. Let me read something he says when there was the war in Gaza and Israel about a month ago, when there are some rockets coming from Gaza and Israel's moved in to destroy everything standing in the way. Obama said there is no country on earth that would tolerate missile raining down under its decision from outside the border. So we are fully supportive of Israel's right to defend itself from missiles landing on people's homes. But he himself sending drones, raining missiles, killing people standing in line buying bread or having wedding. There are 300, I think more than 350 drones mission sent under Obama's administration. More people care. 175 children are killed so far. We have here 2 guests that really will follow this events very closely. We have Coleen Rowley, as all you know, retired ex-FBI agent, 2002 Time Person of the Year, one of 3. And next to her, Peter Thomson is a former prosecutor and peace activist. Welcome to BelAhdan, both of you. Thank you so much for coming. This is our new studio. This is your first time. We are honored to have you. Let's start with you, Coleen. You know, you've been following this, and you wrote just a letter to the editor to the New York Times. You said the Pandora box has opened wide, adding to our vexing security problem. We should never have forgotten what Sir Peter Ustinov is credited as saying: terrorism is the poor man's war, and war is terrorism of the rich. Expand a little bit on this.
Well, that's a profound saying, that terrorism is a poor man's war is terrorism. A rich man's terrorism is war. And what the background...
The rich man is America.
Right. The background here is that when Bush sent in a land army into Iraq, there were professors, and especially one in Chicago, who started to study the impact of what this occupation in Iraq was. And he found that the occupation itself was creating the suicide terrorists. And so he wrote papers, and he actually spoke at the Pentagon. He finally convinced people that this was completely counterproductive, to the point where former Defense Secretary Gates has a famous saying, famous quote where he said, "You'd have to be an idiot to send in these massive land armies in order to get regime change or whatever." So what happened is Obama tried to do a lighter footprint than what Bush was doing in order to not create the additional terrorists. And so he went with drone bombing, and he was sold on precision, that it could be accurate, and that you would only get, for instance, the bin Ladens, the high-value level terrorists. And he went also with covert operations by use of joint special operation teams, and cyber warfare. Those are the 3 things. Those are all secret. The public doesn't know much about those, certainly not the American public, and they do not require on-the-ground troops. And so there's almost no casualties on the American side, which is, of course, from an American point of view, is a very... But, of course, Obama himself, in that quote that you just read, is if you could imagine being the people living under the drones and having these constant predators and hellfire missiles hitting your communities, you're terrorized as an impact. And, of course, we'll get into it, but this is where opening Pandora's box comes in.
How effective this is, and it seems to me, if some statistics said that only high value was only 2% of all this raids.
Right. You know, it was sold, and I know Peter here is going to talk about the legality of this, but it was sold, the legal memo that was first written was on killing an American citizen, al-Awlaki in Yemen. Mm-hmm. And they know that memo exists because it's been leaked, etc., so there's been efforts to get a hold of that memo to analyze it. But that's how it was sold on the high value. It turns out from the entities that have really counted the number of civilian casualties, the number of children, the number you mentioned, 176 children, that's just in Pakistan. That does not include Afghanistan or Yemen.
Somalia.
And we just heard this week that Yemen claims that all civilians were killed, even though the United States claimed that they hit militants. I want to point out one other thing is high-value targets, which the Bureau of Investigative Journalism says it's only 2% of all the people killed. Thousands of people now have been killed. They claim there's only 2% are high value. The other category, though, other than children, is called militant. And those could be your low-foot soldiers, or they could simply be a male over the age of 15 who is presumed, our government presumes any male in the vicinity.
He might be a terrorist.
No, it's presumption that you're a militant. Mm-hmm. You're not maybe presumed to be a high value as a bin Laden, but you're presumed to be a militant.
Helping drinking water. Peter, some of these raids and some of this foot soldier or unsoldier is done under civilian. You know, when there is some law, international law that govern military and military operation and compact, because people in uniform, they have to adhere to Geneva and some of this law. But some of these things are, you know, done by unmilitarized personnel, and there is no oversight. There is no. So what govern those operations?
You mean the non-government, non-military people that are sending the drones?
They send the drone. They decide from the control room, air conditioned. They sit down and decide who should die and who should not die. I mean, this is for me. It's like Obama's fatwa, like the Ayatollah fatwa of Salman Rushdie. This guy should die. This is Obama's fatwa, and nobody talks about this. He is the judge. He is the executor. He is everything. Decide who should die and who should not.
Well, your question raises a whole bunch of questions to make kind of sense of all of it. The whole operation is often justified on the rubric of this is something that hasn't happened before. It's a new war, it's new circumstances, and therefore the old rules don't really apply. And what happens in that void is that then people start making up the new rules. And of course, if you have the power, you can make up the rules to fit yourself. But
domestically, but internationally?
Domestically, well, what happens with international law is there's always great dispute about its applicability, whether it's binding, you know, all those sorts of things. So, to get back to drones, if international law is applying, international humanitarian law, that would mean that there is an armed conflict. An armed conflict basically is a war, and it would be governed by the law of war. If that were the situation, then they would have to meet both proportionality and distinction under international law. That is, they couldn't be killing too high percentage of citizens for proportionality, and for distinction there would have to be the ability, through whatever technical means they use, to not target facilities that are going to hurt civilians, such as, you know, water treatment plants, electrical facilities, food,
bakery,
food governing, you know, agricultural things that would, if they are destroyed, would also hurt the people. Now, where all those rules come is from Geneva Convention. Now, that gives at least some argument for carrying out these strikes if they could meet those provisions, which there's been discussions here indicating they could not. And you've been talking about that. However, in this situation, what an armed conflict is defined as is pervasive armed engagement.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going on. What's really going on is that once Karzai has been elected, any possibility of law of war really absolves itself, and then the domestic law of wherever the acts are taking place would apply. So if domestic law is in place, I mean, there is conflict, but it's not persistent.
You mean domestic law in Afghanistan?
Yes.
Okay.
And in Pakistan.
Of course, who trusts the law now?
And Yemen and all those places. So if domestic law applied, or United States domestic law were applying to the people that are making the decision to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
If domestic law applied in any of those places, basically what it comes down to is there has to be a showing of self-defense, and if self-defense can be shown, then you...
Well, self-defense has been used by Israel to invade countries, to kill at will. But let's listen to the Obama's nominee, CIA nominee, John Brennan. He himself, he's saying, drones strikes are legal and ethical, unwise. Legal and ethical, unwise. That's a huge, not everything wise is legal, or not everything legal is wise. So how can you come up with something like that?
Well, and also practical. Whenever you talk about these things, it's very hard to remember there is legality, there is ethics, and then there's practicality.
Which is wise, the wise part.
So one of the things you've already talked about is the argument that it's unwise because it creates terrorism. Ethically, really that comes down to, are you killing innocent people? And then how many innocent people can you do morally? What does collateral damage really mean? What is the value of a human life? And legally are some of the things I've just talked about. And let me finish that self-defense idea, because that's the only thing we've heard publicly from the Obama administration, that it is self-defense. But self-defense requires, under domestic law, to be under an imminent threat. And if you can't show an imminent threat and you don't have any other alternatives, then self-defense doesn't apply. For instance, when you said in Israel, Hamas was shooting rockets into Israel, they could say that was an imminent threat.
Yeah.
And the defense then would have to be reasonable. I mean, in other words, if they're shooting some rockets, you can't go in and wipe out the whole community. But in this situation, we are not in this country. We are not even, most of the time, shooting these in Afghanistan, where there was armed conflict going on. We are in third or fourth countries that have very little possibility to be an imminent threat. There is a theoretical long-term threat, but no imminent threat.
Rowley, why this issue is kind of kept in the dark from the American people? Why there is no outcry when there is a few students were shot in the school? There was a huge outcry. Why, when there is that young lady was shot, presumably or illegally by Taliban, because she was, demanding education for kids. I mean, all the Western media on this day and nights, were everywhere you look, and following, braiding hair, everything. But this,
it's a good question. Why are we kept in the dark? And the government tells us when they are gathering information about citizens that you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide. So why are you objecting to your emails and your telephone conversations being intercepted? Well, put that same argument on the government. Why are they going into court against the New York Times, against the ACLU, and saying that we can't? They told this district judge just recently, Coleen McMahon, who said it's like looking at Alice, it's like being an Alice in Wonderland. That she's apologizing for not giving the legal rationalization for the drone bombing. And she's saying it's like being Alice in Wonderland. I can't give you these documents. And the government will not even justify to a district judge why the documents have to be secret. Can you imagine this? Well, my guess is this secrecy is hinging upon the fact that it is completely unethical, illegal, and the one thing that we are starting to learn about, because there are reporters that are counting the civilian casualties, and there are people counting the increasing amount of al-Qaeda terrorism in Yemen, for instance. It's tripled. So since the drone bombing campaign began in Yemen, the number of al-Qaeda on the peninsula has gone from 300 to over 1,000. It's tripled. So that we know, but the unethical and the illegal part, the reason is because it is illegal. And it reminds me very much of John Yu's memo, August 1st of 2002, when he legalized torture. It was done very quickly, very shoddy. He took the wrong definitions, and as soon as the law professors got a hold of that memo, and they were able to analyze and assess it, they went, oh my goodness, completely wrong, completely unethical. I think that is why the government will not give the ACLU or the New York Times these memos.
Peter, tell us the relationship between the law and culture, and how, I mean, it seems like when you really want something, you create the law that justify that. How does that play out, the politics of legality, and how, what is the aptitude of the legality of an issue and the aptitude of politics and the culture of it? And you teach ethics.
Yeah, there's, it's really a sad story, because before 9/11, in areas of extrajudicial disappearances and deaths and torture and all of these kind of fundamental legal and ethical principles, the United States was the leader in the world in upholding those principles. When 9/11 came along, all of a sudden, now we're on the flip side of all these arguments, looking for justification. So, law school's great, and when you go to law school, everyone says, well, now you know the law, and they ask you questions, tell me about it. But it's all interpretation. And politics has a big impact there because, for instance, on the torture memo, what the client wanted to hear, that is the administration, was that they could use coercive interrogation. What the lawyers in the first instances, John Yoo and Bibi and some of the others, wanted to do was keep their client happy. And they viewed themselves as the law team against terrorism. Now, what lawyers are supposed to do is take an honest and objective view of the law. That is, to look at all the different arguments of the law and then give advice, whether the client likes it or dislikes it. And it's very hard sometimes to tell the client, what you're doing can't be done. But that's a lawyer's responsibility. And since you can make different interpretations and come up with different theories, that's really what's happened after 9/11.
But, at the end of the day, and, you're a lawyer or a judge or whatever, you are an American. You are a patriotic American. You are protecting the country. You are avoiding another 9/11. All this argument, you hear it from top-notch legal, individuals. I mean, as a legal person yourself, you practice this for more than 35 years. How does it affect the morale, the integrity of our legal system?
Oh, I think it definitely hurts it. I mean, I think there's a strong argument, and lots of people have made this, that what we have done in terms of terrorism has been counterproductive, that the military solution is not the solution to terrorism. Look at Israel. They've been using a military solution to terrorism for 50 years. And is the terrorism gone? No, it just keeps getting worse. Whereas, if you would start at the very beginning, right after 9/11, I remember Vice President Cheney deriding the people who were saying we should use the rule of law. He had a big speech. He says, we need to go to the dark side and we need to get them no matter what. And he said, and what do the others say? They said we should indict them. And then they'd laugh about that. Well, that's exactly what should have happened. We should have followed the rule of law and gained some respect, because there are millions and millions and millions of people in the Arab world that are just becoming, further enraged. And if we had followed the rule of law and had an indictment and we're going to execute the warrant on the indictment, they could have done the operation almost exactly as it was done on bin Laden, only they would be within the rule of law because they would be executing a warrant instead of just going in on a commando raid and have an extrajudicial assassination.
Coleen, we have a few minutes left here, and I know one of a doctor in Yemen was talking to Obama. He said, if your drone killed my daughter, I'm coming at you in your own. What is the copycat of all this? How many countries now they claim they have drones?
And this is really about opening Pandora's box on top of increasing the level of terrorism and the people who hate you, because you're not using evidence. And it's inherently inaccurate. Even drone bombing, where they surveil somebody for a long time, once they press the button, there have been cases of little children walking out. And then the pilot afterwards, who presses the button, says, did we just hit a child? There are articles about this, and they can't live with themselves. We actually have drone pilots now that are suicidal. So completely counterproductive. But on top of all of that...
I thought this was unarmed ones.
On top of the counterproductive nature of it, we have the whole national system now that is in this war and can't seem to pull back and can't seem to get its sense back. John Brennan's nomination for head of CIA is a perfect example. He's actually known as the kill list, the assassination czar. He's the one who actually compiles the list of people to be killed, and now Obama has just named him to be CIA director. He was also the architect of the kidnappings, the extraordinary renditions. And no one knows what his involvement was.
That was during Bush.
That was during Bush, and now he's being named as to be the head of the CIA.
I thought Obama was against it, and he was going to stop rendition.
That what?
Obama was going to stop a rendition.
That's what it was promised.
Yeah.
And now Brennan claims that this doesn't have to meet due process. He claims it can just be a judicial process. He's making up a new term here. And so this is the problem. Unless the public of the United States realizes that this is actually hurting, 76 countries now have drones or are getting drone technology. And so this opening Pandora's box, we are going to be on the other side of it. They just found a drone floating 1,000 miles next to the Philippines in the ocean. So there are drones. Iran has brought down drones. There are ways that hackers can get in and spoof and jam drones. There's going to be 30,000 drones inside the United States for domestic surveillance and other uses. There actually are some good uses, too, of drones. But they're talking about 30,000 licenses being given by 2020 inside the United States for drone technology. They don't know the problems of safety as well as civil liberties. There have been many crashes of drones near cities and residential areas. And so we might...
What are they looking for?
Well, the ones that have crashed have been in Djibouti. They've been by military bases, but
no, the domestic one.
Well, the ones domestic uses are policing, and there have been many police agencies.
And under the oversight of the police?
Right. FAA will grant you, Department of Homeland Security, by the way, will give you a grant up to a police department to get a domestic surveillance
I thought
drone.
Blackwater will be involved in this.
Blackwater is involved, and as are all those
This is not
contractors.
policing. This is militia. Then.
The defense contractors, like Blackwater, are involved in the landings and takeoffs. And this is what I just mentioned. There have been numerous crashes that the public doesn't know about. Those crashes have been in Djibouti and the Seychelles, but they've been near, some of them have crashed into the ocean, but they've been close to residential areas. And again, if you think about 30,000 police drones, and they could be used for good purposes to spot forest fires and things like that.
So what's the legal rights of citizens if what you're looking at from your window is not a bird, it's actually, cameras and drones? What can a citizen do?
There'll be Fourth Amendment litigation as to whether or not that's a violation of your right to privacy.
So
and without 9/11,
that would be.
This never would have come up.
So what is about America that when really things get tough and we need our rights and our amendments and our constitution, there will be a violation of all of that. That's really when the law should work.
Well, if there are some good uses of drones, and I'm not aware of all the, writings and technical, but if there can be a limitation and it's only used in criminal investigations or only used for, public safety or something like that, and not for spying on people without, probable cause. To get a search warrant, you have to have probable cause to believe A, there's been a crime committed, and B, that the person who's involved in the residence was involved and there's some evidence of that crime in that area. So if there's that kind of proof, then you can use surveillance and you can go in with a search warrant, you can violate rights to privacy. But if there's just generalized suspicion and surveillance, and they're watching you because you've been randomly selected 46 times at the airport.
Always randomly.
Then it's a violation of privacy. It's a Fourth Amendment violation.
Well, Coleen, Rowley, thank you so much. FBI agent, Time Person of the Year. Thank you so much for coming in with us. Peter Thomson, former prosecutor and peace activist. Thank you so much for coming. We're really enlightening us all.
See you.
Be safe, America. We'll see you next week. And be aware of those drones around your house. They are not birds. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all.